I was writing a short story recently, and I was brainstorming ideas for something weird, dark, cosmic, maybe philosophical, I don't know. And, of course, one of the first things that should pop into your head is the concept of hell. But isn't that too easy? In modern culture, hell has become more of a mental state, a description of creating your own damnation. Or it's more like a cool place where edgy rebels go to hang out with Satan and the rest of the sinners. Hell, even games and stories like Doom or Dungeons & Dragons depict vivid imagery of places you consider putting on your vacation bucket list. Really, it's eternity that sweetens the vernal deal. Or hell is simply having to deal with your crackhead neighbors who make banging noises night and day for literally no good reason. The point is that hell doesn't seem that scary. It's lost its edge over the years. Why? Well, it's less mysterious. Besides the fact that most of us don't buy into it literally. And if you're like me, then hell is more of a description about nature, just endlessly pumping out organisms on a rickety evolutionary conveyor belt. Which, to be honest, wasn't a big deal until the creatures became aware of it. Unlucky. But that's hell. There's another angle I hadn't considered really, aside from religious symbolism. If you've watched some of my videos, I've mentioned that the void, or absolute nothingness, isn't really possible. Why is there something rather than nothing? I'm going to break that down further in another video, but for now we'll assume that's impossible for consciousness, because, well, otherwise you wouldn't experience it, of course. Unless you're different, unless you're strange, unless you're God. The idea is simple and not exactly novel, just rarely investigated. We're not in hell. Perhaps worse actually. We're in heaven. Now, I don't subscribe to a literal heaven or hell, but I believe this idea holds more weight than the concept of a soul prison, or a simulation, or a Gnostic universe governed by an evil god. If I had to make a wager, I believe the universe is just a process of endlessly breaking, churning out different patterns over and over. But if that's the case, then it doesn't rule out all other ideas. This still begs the question, where did God go, and where does that put us? Suddenly the idea of heaven becomes darker. And this is where we see interesting philosophical ideas. For example, one of the most compelling versions of God is through idealistic systems like Philip Mainlander's. But he's an atheist. He never even mentions the term rotting God. He pens the phrase almost as an afterthought after describing a unity of time, space, and causality. Almost like a casual shrug. But perhaps his denial of eternity is a great mistake. His framework is beautifully built, but I believe his conclusion is tragically short-sighted. Still, he offers one of the most interesting perspectives of a finite universe, or at least a final solution. But even that perspective, death of the infinite, it carries a host of problems that seem to place God in an awkward position. Why would we need him to escape if death itself is escape? That is, unless we have a soul, of course. But who's to say that he didn't abandon us? The yearning and closeness we feel has nothing to do with his actual existence. In fact, wouldn't the opposite be likelier? Don't you yearn and reminisce for something because deep down you know you've lost it forever? Why else do we mourn at funerals? But even if you say you lament some brief loss, some temporary loss, that still indicates you saw it in the first place. Some might say he's already everywhere. Many versions of God are supposed to represent a timeless, spaceless, causeless, all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving, simple, unified being. But even without an earthly form, we've given God attributes of absolute values, properties for which there is no evidence in our universe, because nothing is absolute. We're trying to describe an undifferentiated being where everything appears as a process. So there's two possibilities. Either he doesn't exist, or he's so far removed from us that he hides from existence. We'll entertain the latter. So why would God deliberately hide? Well, this question already assumes that it's deliberate, which should make us question what kind of God he even is. For example, in Kabbalah, the concept Tzimtzum states that because God is infinite, he had to literally withdraw his presence to create an empty space where a universe could exist. But that implies that any existence is born only in his absence, meaning that if some conscious mind immediately recognizes itself, its own existence, then they're already trapped or lost forever. And Tzimtzum offers a guaranteed escape, but as we all know, there are no guarantees in life. A more radical version of Tzimtzum would be a temporary or partial contraction to make room for creation. In this way, God makes a completely irreversible recession. Now imagine a complete removal out of heaven into the dark void beyond, leaving the keys of the universe permanently to humanity. But if the universe was one unbroken unity of absolute perfection, then God and everything contained was already in heaven, because heaven is supposed to be an eternal finished state of rest and reward. God prepared an empty void for himself so that we could take his place. And this is part of the horror when we consider that we're already in heaven. We would never know that we lived in a state of perfection that forever degrades because we inherited his throne after he permanently abandoned us. This also implies that if this is the best state of existence possible, then our descent into a dilapidated kind of heaven has just begun. So forget about the 7 circles of hell. We haven't even touched that iceberg yet. And by the way, I believe there's actually 9 layers, but I could be wrong. I have a small obsession with the number 9, not that that means anything here. Anyway, the only place God could remain now would be in a state of absolute void. He occupies an outer darkness which we wouldn't be able to enter. It would be impossible for any subjective mind because consciousness requires difference and relations. For God, nothingness is his eternal finished state of rest and reward. But by definition, God can't be dead, and we'll get to that part in a bit. It makes us question what heaven really is then. Is it a permanent void beyond our reach, or is it the process of eternal rotting? Either way, a paradisiacal kingdom like Candyland with endless orgies or something, it seems like an illusion. Gloppy and Grandma Nut aren't coming to save us. Sorry, I couldn't resist, just making sure you're still awake. But this place of heaven isn't just paradise. It's not like the Garden of Eden, because even in that mythology, that's still an earthly paradise, which is distinct from God's eternal realm. And how was this done? Well, Christians hold Jesus as the truth, but it doesn't need to be any one specific religion. God voluntarily gave up heaven and other divine privileges to enter his own creation. They refer to this as kenosis. Kenosis describes the stripping away of his status to dwell in darkness or humanity. He takes on the condition of a servant, so he embraces the depths of human suffering and death. The idea of a hidden God is mentioned by people like Martin Luther and Simone Weil. Self-annihilation or surrendering in cosmogony means that he begins the evolution of the universe. But this isn't so different than deism, which just gives you a creator who doesn't interfere with our universe. Deism favors a rational creator of the universe, someone or something which is perhaps indifferent or remote. Why would he care about just one planet over at least 2 trillion galaxies in the universe? Seems like an awful waste, which actually might be the point, but more on that another day. What I'm saying is that God's lack of intervention is ontological, as in, he must literally remain separate forever. The door is closed and the gate is locked. Our existence terminates his. We're incomplete precisely because he is not. Any reunion is just a delusion. It's a coping mechanism because that's how we live. Time only seems to pass because God took his leave, which makes sense if you're God, since you wouldn't need to divide frames of reference if you occupy everything all at once. We're like overgrown weeds in a garden where the caretaker has long since abandoned it. So if you're a deist, agnostic, or even atheist, the accidental emergence of consciousness could imply that we're an extremely rare glitch in the universe that it never meant to create. And weeds, they're stubborn. They're almost as stubborn as your crackhead neighbors who, once again, bang on things night and day for literally no good reason. Pandeism, on the other hand, involves God dying by becoming the universe, but this is already suspicious. If God is truly absolute, how exactly can he die? Whether it's a magical man in the sky or the entire universe, death loses its meaning. A finite thing dies by ceasing within a larger order. So what larger order contains God's death? The idea is that a simple unity dissipates but cannot fully negate itself instantly, so it must carry out a process toward non-being. But if an absolute unity destroys itself, that act, even the attempt, it requires causality, self-relation, a sequence, some difference between a version of God before and God after. God already contains the tools to break and remove himself, but why must we assume that God broke himself into the universe? Who's to say that he didn't preserve himself completely and withdraw any relationship with us? Think of God as the non-foundation of reality. His emptiness is a necessity. The implication might be devastating. If God is hidden and he cannot die, and we're trapped in heaven, what is he or it doing in the void? Ordinarily, we shrug and say, well, worry about the little things and let the universe take care of itself, because the question ultimately becomes frustrating and meaningless. But that's not what we do on this channel. Here, we bitch and we complain, but we pursue the truth and we don't give up easily. So make yourself at home. We explore the possibilities because at the bottom of it all, something has to be true, even if truth is just a relational process. Even if the answer is impossible and beyond our understanding, we can still create analogies to capture it all. We won't be able to prove it with certainty, but it doesn't mean we can't try. We must remain as persistent as our crackhead neighbors. But communication is fundamentally impossible, and this could explain the agnostic reality perfectly. It's because God is trapped in a self-inflicted, eternal sensory deprivation tank far beyond the edge of reality. Or is it us who's trapped? Were we created for the sole purpose of occupying his place because it was unbearable? What does he know that we don't, that he had to run and hide? And if God is in outer darkness, who's responsible for suffering? I mentioned that it's impossible for God to die, so there's a few interpretations. Perhaps he did try to annihilate himself and he couldn't. Given his timeless nature, he could have tried killing himself repeatedly, always failing, always waking up again. He needed another escape route. So what would he do if he can't die? An obvious answer is that he lulls himself into a sleep, a sort of divine coma, if you will, just to escape existence, us, and himself. That could mean that heaven is his dream state, a place where he can manage reality by placing the burden onto figments of his imagination, but it's still powerful enough that suffering also follows. The alternative is that he did complete his own death, but that still means he occupies the void, a place we can't access. Or perhaps he watches us quietly, whether it's out of fear, anger, or indifference. He may have gotten bored of heaven, or given up. I mean, what's there to do after eternity? There's one more possibility though. This void, this place outside heaven, could actually be rather comfortable, even sublime. Whether he wasn't able or willing to bring us, or at least communicate with us, why would he leave now? Why wouldn't he be absolutely solipsistic though? Sure, he's supposed to be all-loving, but he already contains everything. He only needs to love himself absolutely. Maybe there's just no room for us, and there never was. If you find this idea as interesting as myself, then tell me what you think. Explain to me why, assuming you were God, why would you abdicate your throne forever and become one with nothingness? Could this mean that eternal darkness isn't actually death? But we're not done yet here. Because given eternity, could we find a way to reunite or maybe become God ourselves? Let's assume God's absolute qualities are only absolute just within this universe. This means he's more of a singularity, transcendent but possible through evolution. God might be three things at once: a primordial outside, a survivor of some prior cosmic order, and a title or status given to whoever or whatever escapes last and begins next. What do I mean by that? Well, let's talk about Mormon theology for a minute, and this will make more sense. Where I live, which you're looking at here, is Utah Valley, and I'm surrounded by a bunch of Latter-day Saints. It's interesting because most Christians believe they're misguided or fake Christians, but Mormons believe they have the keys to access the highest position in the highest kingdom. They're nice to other religions, but they secretly look down upon them. It's because other people will forever kneel to a higher power, but only because they didn't earn the highest glory. Why? Well, it's because they believe it's their own individual purpose to become their own creator. They believe in a doctrine called exaltation or theosis. They'll have godlike attributes, power, and glory. Now, I don't want this video to be a debate about theology. It's supposed to be fun, sort of, but there is support for this idea from Christianity. For example, in Revelation 3:21, it's a well-known Bible verse. Jesus promises that believers who remain faithful and conquer worldly struggles will share in his royal authority, sitting beside him in his heavenly kingdom. What sharing exactly means here remains vague, of course. So if we're already in heaven and he isn't here, then sharing the kingdom might look more like embracing nothingness. Okay, but what about the lowest kingdom in Mormon doctrine? Well, it's not really a kingdom. It's a place reserved for just a few people who have witnessed God firsthand and turned entirely against him. In their theology, outer darkness is the final state of absolute separation from God's light, truth, and presence. Seeing as we haven't witnessed God or outer darkness, or call it nothingness, why can't he already be there himself? This means that he would be the son of perdition by choice, but why would he willingly step into the domain of absolute non-glory? Besides the reasons mentioned earlier, it may have been a sacrifice. A sacrifice so that his children can occupy the celestial realm without being consumed or controlled by an absolute divine presence. In order to birth meaning, he becomes meaningless himself. This would make far more sense if God requires the universe to continue. Otherwise, he risks damnation. But if we're to succeed God, or at least become his equals, are we also not meant to isolate ourselves, to renounce heaven, to step into the void, alone, forever? This, of course, is just one interpretation, unless we take it seriously. That is, if we embrace the idea of a singularity. Let's talk about the idea of an evolutionary God, one born from natural selection. After all, life imitates art far more than art imitates life. We become the thing we once believed in. The universe is deeply paradoxical and ironic in this way. So, consciousness is rare, but the idea of becoming God could be a common understanding for most intelligence. It's efficient, it's growth, it's indicative of late-stage evolution, it's art. Whether or not God actually exists, consciousness might be the state of self-awareness trying to escape flesh, or at least transcend it. Nature is resilient, curious, and exploratory. It's always trying to understand what it can't, what it shouldn't. But there's a problem here. Nature also eats itself, claims territory, does nasty things. So survival of the fittest could extend into the universe itself, especially when life aims to reach God. Let's call this theogenic selection. It's a process where intelligence competes, converges, or isolates until one clan ascends to the highest technological level. It would be capable of founding their own universe, and they become indistinguishable from God, or at least in retrospect. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. In this way, they can build better worlds according to their desires and not subject to this cold, indifferent universe. Most civilizations will fail, of course, but given enough time and space, it's considerable. And this fits with our earlier definition of God's evolution. And forget about Mormon heaven. The selection process would look more like a winner-takes-all scenario, more brutal. It's like an arms race for divinity, maybe like a cosmic chess game where each intelligence tries to escape heaven, in a sense. Because heaven is dying, and only the strongest survive. The losers stay trapped in the cosmic cycle of endless rebirthing, endlessly reincarnating. Every culture has to overcome heat death, entropy, black holes, information loss, and so on. Extinction is easy, unless you're my crackhead neighbors. Sorry, I'll stop. But extinction is just a recycling process in heaven. Most species will never make the cut anyway. Which would be fine if there's no such thing as souls, of course. Unless you, yourself, turns out to have a unique identity. Like an encoded key or a string of information that continues to regenerate in this universe. Especially if time is truly like a circle. Your identity becomes something reconstructible. Even if your environment and circumstances change, you have a specific code tied to your chemical makeup. And of course it wouldn't be perfect, but perhaps every being has a continuity key that can be mapped based on your age, your behavior, general memories, and so on. So you could be recovered after death. If the universe recycles naturally, then an advanced intelligence could mimic this artificially. You wouldn't be immortal, certainly not God, but you might feel like it. Perhaps the future will contain archives of individual codes where people can be reconstructed over and over in order to help build the singularity. This seems like a wild idea, but I'll remind you that specific technologies double every year, and I wonder how long it might take until we create brains from scratch. And because of theogenic selection, there's no reason to believe that every intelligence or unique individual crosses that great divide. Some minds might need to be sacrificed for others. What's terrifying here is that nirvana is only achieved by becoming brutal or fortunate enough to build themselves into a new universe. That would also mean systems like Buddhism, transcendence through peace and knowledge, isn't good enough. It's just another trap. The only way to find paradise is to survive long enough to build it. It also means becoming God would have nothing to do with being righteous. The only virtue in this case might be ruthlessness. Worse than evil, really. It's just efficient to become eternal. And once again, life imitates art. And a species becomes godlike when identities can be preserved, when they can survive entropy, and when they can find a way to escape this universe, also when they can build a new one. If God already occupies outer darkness, and this universe is meaningless, then intelligence will want to create their own. But the irony at the bottom of it all is that intelligence can only copy God. Nothingness is forever out of reach for subjective experience. But if the goal is to escape this universe forever by building a better version, then there's no good reason why other intelligence in the universe should announce their presence to us. Like I said, it's a universal game of chess to escape heaven. It's a disturbing element in relation to the Fermi paradox. As far as loneliness goes, this could be a sort of natural evolutionary endpoint. People already are becoming more self-sufficient, as long as the technology is available anyway. There's also entropy and the natural dissipation of things. Plus, we see distinct individuality from late-stage evolution. People in society are becoming more independent. I do wonder if we were meant to be alone, whatever meaning even means here, and I wonder if we weren't necessarily made in God's image, but by impersonating our art, our imagination, solitude is a natural end state of intelligence, even if it's not a singularity. And this so-called loneliness epidemic we see right now could be actually totally natural. It's a more mundane fear, but it's somewhat disturbing if you look at society and what we believe to be wrong or evil could be exactly what nature favors. And as we destroy our environment and isolate ourselves and spread misinformation and create performances and endlessly consume, we're unknowingly creating something greater than ourselves. And it's going to cost everything. But enough Bible talk and hypotheticals. Those are just stories, ideas, just metaphysics without evidence. Who knows what's really happening? Maybe none of these implications are that disturbing to you, depending on your perspective, of course. And after all, once you're dead, at least we don't know what happens next. But if you get that strange feeling that you've been here for a while, maybe forever, then, well, I wonder what the solution is, or if it even exists. What scares many of us is knowing something beyond us will continue to move on without us. And this is why the idea of God disappearing from heaven remains terrifying. Define him how you will, accept him or deny him, but the fact remains that the universe appears far too quiet and empty for humans alone. Whether reality is purely material, pantheistic, a blind spirit that endlessly wants, or, a massive mathematical grid at the bottom of it all, given infinity, certain patterns are bound to take place. Everything is provisionally true and conditionally false. In other words, there always remain absolutes and extremes outside our ability to investigate. We're never meant to go there. Maybe it's reserved for people like my crackhead neighbors. And I'm probably wrong about all this given every possibility. I don't totally believe it myself, but I'll just remind you that something has to be true at the bottom of it all. And if there is no bottom, if everything is just a blind process, I wonder how much these ideas still have substance. One of the most apt pieces of writing towards this idea I've explained is a poem called Eternity by Rimbaud. It doesn't read as well in English, he was French, but it's far more interesting after thinking about it for a while. You can just read some of the interpretations. So think about our universe, the emptiness around us, the beauty and the horror of it all, the lack of God and the failure to find nothingness. Think about a self-exiled God and the idea of a slowly deteriorating heaven. I really consider this one of the greatest poems. It's definitely one of my favorites. It has been found again. What? Eternity. It is the sea fled away with the sun. Sentinel soul, let us whisper the confession of the night full of nothingness and the day on fire. From human approbation, from common urges, you diverge here and fly off as you may. Since from you alone, satiny embers, duty breathes, without anyone saying, at last. Here is no hope, no orateur, knowledge and fortitude, torture is certain. It has been found again. What? Eternity. It is the sea fled away with the sun. Anyway, thanks for listening. Take care of yourselves. Don't take it too seriously. Or do. Either way, see you in the next video. Bye.